How do you develop aerobic fitness in compromised situations, and how do you do so while still improving skills? Hi everyone, Andrew here, helping you help your swimmers get faster. This week we're going to talk about coaching creativity and problem solving in the context of developing aerobic fitness. Let's dive in. I've been asked about aerobic training for sprinters, and I've also been asked about aerobic training and aerobic maintenance training when dealing with very large groups. As an example of problem solving, I'm going to provide some context in general for aerobic training, as well as address these two specific questions. So before we talk about the specific situations, let's talk about aerobic training in general. Aerobic training is a huge opportunity for improvement. There's a lot of volume, there's a lot of repetition, and the intensities are controlled, which all make it really conducive for developing really good skills. Sometimes a term associated with aerobic training is the term garbage yardage. While that can certainly be true, it's only garbage if there's no skill development involved and there's no purpose behind what is being done. In that case, the only real purpose is to achieve volume. But when it's done well and with purpose and with specific intention and with skills in mind, it's a really powerful way to improve performance. So whenever you're doing aerobic training, make sure that you have a skill component involved. And you can keep it super simple, just even having them count their strokes. And also, you want to have a performance component as well. They should have some awareness of how fast they're swimming and what they're trying to accomplish. And then if you can make sure they're successful, you can make sure they're consistent, they're going to get a lot of benefit from this type of training. And that's true regardless of the type of athlete they are. And then of course, if things aren't going well, you need to adjust the set so that they can be successful, they can be consistent, and they can learn new skills. The better their skills are when they're swimming aerobically, the better their skills are going to be when they're trying to go fast. It's not just a base of fitness because you're developing skills as well, and skills lead to speed. So with that context in mind, let's tackle the challenge of how do you train aerobically, or how do you maintain aerobic fitness when you have a really big group? So one of the challenges with big numbers is that it's hard to swim well and it's hard to swim effectively when there's a lot of traffic. Some of the options you might like to use are simply off the table because swimmers are literally swimming on top of each other. They're also touching each other's feet. You're dealing with all sorts of waves. There's all sorts of problems that come up with it. And so you have to be strategic so that you still get the fitness work and you can still get the skill development as well. Here's where we have to solve problems and get a little bit creative, but still keep in mind what we're trying to accomplish. So one of the strategies I like to use in this situation is use really short distances with really short rest periods. So instead of doing 10 200s, you can do a whole lot of set of 25s because that short little break gives them just enough space so that there's a little bit more space between the last person and the first person, and it's less likely that they're going to be lapping each other and swimming on top of each other. And while we tend to think of aerobic swimming as a little bit longer distances, they're still moving continuously. They're still moving at a pretty solid effort, so you're still going to get the fitness benefits. You want to try to use whatever distances you can, but even if you have to use 25s on really short rest, it can still get the job done, provided that swimmers are swimming really well. Again, it may not be ideal, but it can be sufficient. Another option is to have swimmers start from both ends of the pool. And so that way you give a little bit more space before the last person is caught by the first person. This may allow you to swim slightly longer distances than if everyone was going from the same side. However, you still may have to do shorter distances like we talked about in the previous point. However, you may be able to go a little bit longer, which gives you more options. Now, kids will have to be coordinated. They'll have to manage it a little bit better, but it still works and it's still very possible. And if you have a lot of swimmers, it can be something that's useful and it can be something that makes a difference. A third strategy is to split up the group. Let's say you have 6 lanes and you split it up into 3 groups. You can have one of those groups take up 4 of the lanes and do an aerobic set where you can really spread them out. And in the other lane, one of the groups maybe is doing a kick set where you don't need quite as much space. And then the third group, maybe they're doing underwaters or some other skill activity which doesn't take up as much space. Regardless of the specifics, what you're doing here is you're creating a little bit more space for that aerobic group, and then you're consolidating the space with the other groups. And then you just have the groups rotate through. And so when you need a solid 20 minutes or so of an aerobic set with longer distances, this can be a good way to do that, a good way to get it done. And again, it's not ideal, but it's better than nothing. And if you find yourself in less than ideal situations, you got to make the best of it. This way, you're able to create a little bit of extra lane space and then still work on other important skills with those other 2 groups that are important that may be difficult to address over the course of a week. This allows you to get that in, allows you to do that work, allows you to improve those skills, all while getting an aerobic stimulus that's a little bit better than you otherwise might have been able to accomplish. So those are three strategies that can be used separately or in combination in some form to help manage and create an effective training environment when you have a lot of swimmers and not a lot of space. You still have to do what you have to do. It's a matter of figuring out the best way to get that done. Again, don't worry about my specific examples. You can do it or apply it in any way you want. Just use them as a starting point to figure out what you need to do. And in situations where it's pretty tight, it may be difficult to have swimmers focus on specific skills because they're going to be dealing with a lot of traffic and a lot of just distractions when they're swimming. So something as simple as stroke counts can go a really long way. It'll keep them honest, it'll keep them on track, and it'll give them something objective to focus on. You can even make it a little bit more of a challenge because they're going to have to be dealing with extra traffic, extra waves, and you just tell them, if you can manage to hit your stroke counts in this context, it's going to be a whole lot easier when you got clean water and more space. By framing it correctly, you can turn a challenge into an opportunity. Large groups are tough situations, so it all comes down to creativity and focusing on the result you want to achieve. Now we'll talk about aerobic training and sprinters. With many coaches' experiences, this is kind of like oil and water. It doesn't mix. The problem isn't necessarily with aerobic training, it may be with the way aerobic training is performed. If it's done in a way that causes a ton of fatigue and destroys skills, then yeah, it's not going to be a productive use of time, but it doesn't have to be that way. For sprinters, the best way I've found to think about aerobic training is consider it from a skill perspective. It's an opportunity to practice skills because there's a lot of repetition, so you want to get a lot of practice working on the skills that build speed. So aerobic training for sprinters becomes stroke length and skill work done at controlled intensities for a decent amount of work. You can use relatively shorter distances, relatively longer rest periods, and relatively higher speeds. That's all going to help sprinters be more successful. However, you want to get in a solid amount of work, and it needs to be good work. A lot of focus on stroke length, a lot of focus on skills. And when they can improve their stroke length and when they can improve their skills, that's going to set them up to be successful. That's going to set them up to swim fast. Even though they're not practicing at really high intensities, they'll get that work done elsewhere. It's going to build sufficient fitness without destroying skills. In fact, it'll enhance them and it'll build fitness in a way that doesn't create a lot of fatigue that prevents them from swimming fast. For some sprinters, you can supplement or even replace some fitness work with work done outside the pool. This can be effective, but relying on this type of work exclusively for developing fitness can miss out on some of the skill development in the water. Swimmers will also be missing out on developing strength in the right place that can come as a result of aerobic swimming. Most swimmers are going to benefit more from skill-based aerobic training, especially if their skills aren't world-class, which is going to be the vast majority of them. So aerobic training develops fitness that is relevant for almost all athletes. Aerobic training is really helpful for developing the skills that are critical for every swimmer. So make sure it's done in a way that allows swimmers to work on skills in controlled intensities and get a lot of work in. If they can be successful with that, they're going to create a platform of speed that can be used now and in the future. Hope that was helpful, and as always, keep it simple.